This is Mrs. Washington. We're looking at chapter 45 and the topic is spirituality. I'd like to take a look at our three patients in chapter 45. We have Kevin, Chow, and Margaret. Now, Kevin, maybe you will ask the nurse to pray for him or to pray with him. Chow, can the ethics team recommend a court order so that we can get the care that's needed for his child? Margaret, her involvement in religious activities is requested. This is important to her. And what might the nurse suggest? So we're again looking at holistic care. What is holistic care? Also, how can you be a patient advocate? As far as spiritual needs, the theory by Shelley and Fish, proposed in 1988, says that there are three needs. One is the need for meaning and purpose. So the need for meaning and purpose, I'm thinking about Mr. Chow, meaning and purpose. So what is important to him as he's making healthcare decisions? There's also the need for love and relatedness. So let's take a look at Margot, that need for love and relatedness. And the third spiritual need is the need for forgiveness. And that would be Kevin, the need for forgiveness. So on the slide I have a picture. I'm using it to represent Margot and her husband. Her husband is in bed. It looks like that they are at home, or at least it looks like a home setting. It's hospice. But let's just say they're in their own individual home. And it's 5 years. So when you read the scenario that's in the chapter, I want you to fast forward 5 years. And now we have her husband with advanced stages of Alzheimer's. And maybe he has other health problems also, and now he's in hospice care. So we have a very supportive environment there, and maybe Margaret is surprised. You know, she may have had feelings that she was giving up on her husband. Now she's 80, he's 85, and when she put him in hospice, she felt like she was giving up. But we find out that even with hospice care, we have ways to meet her need for love, the relatedness, the caring. You know, that might be a chaplain that's there with them, and it could be the nurse, and that nurse could be you. Meeting spiritual needs. One thing that I like, and no one asks my opinion, but definitely if you can offer a compassionate presence, that means a lot. And when we go into the chapter where it talks about grief, loss, death, think about that, compassionate presence. So here's a preview. This might be something that a patient would say. She thanked me, and all I did was sit with her for about 10 minutes. That's all I did. All I did was sit with her for about 10 minutes until her son arrived. So maybe we could go back to our story with Margaret, and the nurse was there, and Margaret thanked her, and the nurse was wondering, why is she thanking me? All I did was just sit there for about 10 minutes, and then her son arrived. But let's go into the hospital setting. You know, maybe it's a situation where you could be there with the patient's family member, and it's just your compassionate presence. You're not saying anything. Here's some other ways to meet spiritual needs. Assisting in the struggle to find meaning in the face of suffering, illness, and death. Another, fostering relationships that nurture the spirit, and facilitating the patient's expression of religious or spiritual beliefs and practices. So as you read through the short scenarios at the start of the chapter, you can see how all of these things are related. As far as some concepts that are specific and related to spirituality, it kind of goes into some definitions. So we see spirituality. Spirituality is anything that pertains to the person's relationship with a non-material life force or a higher power. Spirituality. Whereas religion is a term used to describe cultural or institutional religion. I know it's defining a term with its own definition, but a lot of times religion will have different rituals, maybe common beliefs. Okay? The next term is faith. Faith is a confident belief in something for which there is no proof and there is no evidence. That's faith. You might hear your patients or family members say something like this: I'm not religious, but I am spiritual. Here's another one. My faith is what got me through my 5 surgeries. Oh, the human spirit is resilient. All right. Here's some others. Hope. Hope is an ingredient in life that is responsible for a positive outlook, something to look forward to. Hope. Love, connectedness with others. Spiritual health and healing is when those spiritual needs are met. Spirituality and everyday living is something that's involved in health, and it's also involved in illness. So here's some examples. I want to live to see the flowers in the spring. We planted them a few weeks ago. So that might be a patient who is in hospice care. It could be someone who is recuperating from an illness, and they have something to look forward to. It may not mean anything to you, or you might say, how could the flowers make a difference? Or I don't even believe she's going to live that long to see those flowers. Here's another one. I can feel my church family's prayers. So the church family is praying, and I feel their prayers. Okay, there's research out there which validates prayer, and the way that they collected the data was that they had people go to a hospital surgical waiting area, and the other one was where they went to like a critical care waiting area. And these people just, they pray, if it was consented, they prayed for patients who were in the intensive care unit. And the people that they prayed for, their progress was much better, significantly better than the people who didn't get prayed for. Now, I don't know if that's an ethical issue right there, as far as praying for someone and not praying for someone. But anyway, it did make a difference, and they've repeated that research. So what are some beliefs related to faith? Well, have you ever heard anyone use the term agnostic? As one who holds that nothing can be known about the existence of a higher power. Agnostic. Atheist, a person who denies the existence of a higher power. And, hopefully you did not pick up anything in my voice. As soon as I said that, I said I may have sounded just a little bit biased. But I want to just say that we are open as nurses. We know that we will come in contact with people whose beliefs may not be as our beliefs. So just some terms there. Now here's some patient situations. Why did the chaplain come to my room? I put on the form that I was an atheist. Here's another comment. When my life is done, it's done. Life is good here. How could it be better somewhere else? I've enjoyed a wonderful life. And you're not trying to change anyone's belief. You're not trying to say, oh yeah, that's somebody who sees things like I do. Yay, come on. It's just an awareness that we have as nurses as we take care of patients. As far as religious influences, life affirming. Some people look at their religion as it's an enhancement to life. It gives meaning and purpose to their existence. They get strength. They feel like the religious influence is health-giving and life-sustaining. And then it could be life-denying. Some would say, I'm not involved in an organized religion because there's too much restriction, and it encloses my an enclosure to my life patterns. It limits my experiences and my association. It places burdens of guilt on individuals, and I don't want to have all that guilt. Life denying, health denying, and life inhibiting. So some restrictions there. So now let's look at Kevin. When we think about the religious influence, is it something that's affirming him, or is it something that's restricting him? This is what he said. My grandmother said, I had a heart attack at an early age because God doesn't like divorce. Okay, so that's a lot of guilt there. And we find out that he listed his religion as Protestant, but he says it's been a long time since he went to church and since he prayed. So what are some of the factors that affect spirituality? And basically we see these factors listed in every chapter. Developmental considerations, family, ethnic background, formal religion, and life events. So those all help shape one's spirituality. As far as religion, what are some of the characteristics of religions? Okay, many will have some authority or a source of power. May have a portion of scripture or sacred word. There might be an ethical code defining what's right and what's wrong. It might have a psychological or another identity. Within that religion, maybe there are certain aspirations or certain expectations. And something that's common to religions is usually some ideas about what follows death. Okay, beliefs and healthcare practices, major religions in the United States. Now this is table 45-1. You have quite a list of religions and practices. And also I looked in ATI to see which ones were also listed in ATI. And I'll give you a little bit more information about ATI when we get to the last slide. So table 45-1, you need to take a look at the rituals and the dietary practices or dietary rituals, because these are questions that I see when I look in review books, other fundamental books. So I've listed these, and with this list I advise you to go and review the information. So a person may identify as being Adventist, Christian Scientist, Islam, Jehovah's Witnesses, Protestant, or Roman Catholic. And some of them in ATI may have it has a different term associated with it, but when you look at the slide you can see the ones that are also listed in ATI. Nursing diagnosis. I wanted to just list the nursing diagnosis for spiritual problems, and you can find the list on page 1714. So a nursing diagnosis might be readiness for enhanced spiritual well-being, spiritual distress, spiritual pain, spiritual alienation, spiritual anxiety, spiritual guilt, and spiritual anger. And so you take a look at the three patients at the start of the chapter, and some of those nursing diagnoses could actually fit our patients. As far as the goals and outcomes, maybe this would be what would be on a plan of care. Identify spiritual beliefs that meet the needs, that would give meaning and purpose to one's life, or bring love and relatedness, and also forgiveness. Forgiveness is something that you can take a look at. For example, Kevin, and I did spell his name incorrectly. I called him Kevin, but Kevin. So maybe he's looking for forgiveness. Goals. Another goal might be that your patient will derive strength, hope, and comfort from his or her beliefs. Maybe the patient will identify spiritual support. So a support system, very important. Develop spiritual practices that nurture communion with the inner self, God, and the world. And you could probably put R in between any of those. Express satisfaction with compatibility of spiritual beliefs and everyday living. So how do you implement spiritual care? Doesn't say religious care, it says spiritual care. Could be by offering a supportive presence. So, your presence when you come into the room, the patient sees you. All right, good. Facilitating the patient's practice of religion. So maybe your patient has requested help or some type of need that they have in terms of what they would like to do. It could be as simple as them watching something on TV or getting or listening to some music. Nurturing spirituality. So what are some interventions that would help nurture a patient's spirituality? Maybe they need to connect with nature. How about this one? Praying with a patient or for a patient. Now, a lot of discussion can go on about this, but I'm going to tell you, that's why with Kevin, I said maybe he might ask the nurse to pray for him or pray with him. Well, I don't know what to say, Miss Washington. I'm not a praying person, so there's no need of me pretending. But just ask the patient, okay, Miss Jones, what do you want me to say? Well, honey, just say, thank you, Jesus. You know, maybe she said that. Or maybe just say, you know, maybe I don't use the term Jesus, so don't say Jesus. But what I'm saying is the patient can give me words to say. I said, what do you want me to say? And, you know, I might have to put some filters on that, because if it's one of those where maybe they want evil against someone else, I'm not going to pray for that in a sense. But at the same time, you know, if a patient asks you for a prayer, you know, if you don't feel comfortable, say, well, do you have family members that are coming a little later on? Sounds like prayer is important to you. And then they might say, oh, yes, my daughter is coming. Or it could be a 1-800, pray for me. There are just so many ways that you can help your patient in these situations. So don't rule it out. You know, especially when maybe you're limited on time, you're limited on ability, and you still want to help meet the patient's need. What about counseling the patient spiritually? Now, a few of you may have previous certification, previous skills. You're at a comfort level. You can do that. Okay. And also contacting a spiritual counselor. Maybe you're in a facility where there is a clergy person or a chaplain. How about resolving conflicts between treatment and spiritual activities? You know, there are a lot of things that someone might say, well, my religion won't let me do that. Or that's against my value system. And so it's not like the nurse is a miracle worker, but definitely these things are listed so that you will know that there are interventions that can be implemented. So here's a question. True or false? Formal prayer should not be used with patients as it may alienate them. So what do you think? Formal prayer. Well, that's false. Formal prayer is appropriate if, keyword there, if the patient desires it. So here's the situation. Nurse Timmons is consistently late getting off duty. He spends extra time praying with his patients. So here's a comment from another nurse, someone he works with. You know, Nurse Timmons is interested in becoming a parish nurse. However, praying is not the focus for a parish nurse. He needs to explore the criteria and decide on what will be the best work environment for him. So Nurse Timmons wants to become a parish nurse, and even if he keeps working wherever he's working and getting off late, there might be ways that he can modify that, and he can find other outlets to help that need, to nurture that need. So is that a conflict? Maybe he will eventually work somewhere where he can implement more of his skills and talents and interests. Okay. So how do you facilitate the practice of religion? More and more. Okay, here we go. Familiarize the patient with religious services within the institution. You know, we have a chapel service. There's one at 9 o'clock. You know, I find a lot of Catholic patients like to go. There's one at 10 o'clock, and it's, you know, another faith, religion, or whatever. And you also need to respect the patient's need for privacy during prayer. You know, you're going in, you knock on the door, they don't say come in, but anyway, you go in and everybody's gathered around the bed holding hands, and you say, oh my goodness, I knew I would see this one day. I wonder what are they doing. And respect the patient's need for privacy, the family's need for privacy, or you observe your patient and it looks like the patient is praying. Assist the patient to obtain devotional objects and protect them from loss or damage. So if you're admitting a patient and you see the patient has an object and you're sort of familiar with it and you said, oh, that looks very important, tell me more about that. And the patient may say, oh yes honey, I carry these with me everywhere and I want to put them right here, so I'll make sure I don't lose them. You want to arrange for the patient to receive sacraments if desired. Sometimes a patient might say, if anything happens to me, honey, do you have someone who could come in, and if my spiritual advisor, whatever term they want to put in there, is not available, that someone could just do this. Or family members saying, when dad passes away, when dad dies, it is so important that this is performed. All right. And of course, a lot of times you'll see this on your standardized questions, and that is something that has to do with the dietary restrictions or what a person can and cannot eat, or they will not eat, etc. Also, here's the last one. Arrange for a priest, minister, or rabbi to visit if the patient desires and wishes and wants that to occur. So, facilitating the practice of religion. As far as counseling patients spiritually, have the patient articulate their spiritual beliefs. Now, don't be like Nurse Timmons. You're in there for hours because you think that's so interesting because you didn't know a lot about a certain religion and now you want to find out more. So everything has to have a balance. But ask the patient, share a little bit about your beliefs, and so I can know a little bit more. Another one is to explore the origin of the patient's spiritual beliefs and practices. Identify life factors that challenge the patient's spiritual beliefs. Explore alternatives when given those challenges, and develop spiritual beliefs that meet the need for meaning and purpose, care and relatedness, and forgiveness. So as far as that counseling, it's not saying that you as an entry-level graduate nurse, RN, will be doing all these wonderful and fabulous things, but it is saying that counseling may be, should be available for your patient. So you want to explore. Okay, now let's take a look at room preparation, or preparing a room for spiritual counselor visits. So someone to come in. Make sure the room is orderly and free of unnecessary equipment. The patient will appreciate that. Number 2, provide a seat for the counselor near the patient's bed. Number 3, clear the top of the bedside table and cover with a clean white cloth for sacraments. Now that white cloth may be a pillowcase, but at least some action on your part to show that you respect the patient and the rights that the patient has. Maybe it's as simple as drawing the bed curtains if the patient cannot be moved to a private setting. Sometimes it might be, or you can use the conference area down the hall, or we're going to take you down to the surgery waiting area. There are 2 rooms in there that can be used even if they are doing surgery. It's Saturday night at 9 p.m. I'll check with the house supervisor. We'll get you down. I'll get someone to take you down there, or I'll go down there with you, whatever. But anyway, we want to do something that can facilitate the patient's religious and spiritual expression that's done safely and respectfully. So how do you evaluate the outcomes? Well, hopefully your patient will move towards healthy acceptance of his current situation. Maybe there's going to be some reconciliation along the lines of interpersonal differences that may be causing some anguish. Express peaceful acceptance of limitations and failings. Patients come to a point when they can express their acceptance of the situation, for example. Express ability to forgive others and live in the presence. Demonstrate an interior state of joy and freedom from anxiety and guilt. So I'm going back to Kevin. I think he's a good example. As far as the ATI review module, is chapter 35. It talked about connections, interpersonal, and transpersonal. Transpersonal would mean with a higher being, intrapersonal within oneself, and interpersonal would be with others. They give you some definitions, the definitions for faith, hope, and religion. Also give you information about spiritual rituals and things that people may observe. So what would the nurse do in a particular situation? So it can be framed that way. A question would be framed. What should the nurse do? What would the nurse do? And it could even be a healthcare provider assignments. What if it's a female who wants another female to take care of her? And it has to do with religious beliefs. Okay, and then they give you information about patient-centered care, some of the things that I've talked about in terms of meeting the needs of the patient. So it's spirituality, chapter 45. I went through the 3 spiritual needs that are believed to be common for all people. Talked about the influence of spirituality. Talked about some of the different beliefs. We looked at nursing diagnoses. We looked at strategies or interventions to promote spiritual health, and pretty much talked about our 3 patients that we were introduced to in this chapter. So that's the end of chapter 45 on spirituality. Thank you.